Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this interview that Kamala Harris recently did with the Association of Black Journalists, which, by the way, is the same organization that Trump did an interview with, where he called them out for being 30 minutes late, called Kamala Harris out for not showing up, and of course, that made headlines in all sorts of ways, and obviously this interview, in some ways, was nowhere near as harsh as the Trump interview. However, and I do want to make this 100% clear, despite this clip that's going around calling Kamala Harris a joyful warrior.
Joyful warrior has been used to describe your campaign.
You didn't see that just a minute ago, though. Okay, I'm back to my joyful part.
And your opponent and Republicans have at times weaponized you laughing in campaign ads, for example. Why is joy important to you to insert into this election?
Unlike Vice President Harris's other interviews where you had Dana Bash giving her multiple choice answers in order to walk her through it, or the ABC interview where they actually had to edit out 2 to 3 minutes of her garbled nonsense portion of her answer to make her sound more coherent. In this particular one, they hit her with follow-up questions, and she did not stand up to scrutiny, and they also hit her with follow-up questions on an issue that she desperately does not want to talk about. So we're going to get into all this. We're going to talk about it, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
A question that has been asked of you and everybody that's on the Democratic side is whether or not voters are better off now than they were 4 years ago.
So right off the top, Kamala Harris gets hit with a question that she should be ready to answer at this point in time. She's done 3 interviews and a debate, and this was basically the first question in all 3 of those circumstances, and she still completely flops, falls on her face, starts talking nonsense, and that, of course, is the question of, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, or a better rephrasing of this question, which is, are you better off under the Biden-Harris administration, or were you better off under the Trump years? And obviously, when you look at inflation, interest rates, all these different various categories, the price of groceries, the price of gasoline, all of that, the answer is under the evil Orange Man's administration. But Kamala Harris is going to answer, and unfortunately, the follow-ups get good later, but they're not very good here.
4 years ago, when we came in during the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. We came in during the worst public health epidemic in centuries. We came in after the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And a lot of it due in large part to the mismanagement by the former president as it relates to COVID and obviously January 6th. And we had then a lot of work to do to clean up a mess. As of today, we have created over 16 million new jobs, over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. We have the lowest black unemployment rate in generations. We have invested in small businesses, and they're to the benefit of many people, but including black small businesses, some of the highest rate of creation of new black small businesses in years.
So let's be clear about this. The economy under President Trump was roaring. You had low inflation, low unemployment, wage growth for the middle class, and all these different various indicators that showed us that things were actually going pretty well. Then the pandemic hits, the policy becomes shutdowns, President Trump tries to open up the economy, but a bunch of governors, specifically Democratic governors, decided that it was more intelligent for them politically to lock down the economy up until Election Day to maximize the suffering in order to make sure Biden had the best chance of winning the presidency. And yes, I am attaching this cynical motivation to it because it is much deserved, but everybody understood it to a certain extent that when the economy opened up, some people, or the large majority of people who lost their jobs, would end up going back to work. So Vice President Kamala Harris is taking credit for the jobs that were going to come back. And in fact, were actually delayed in coming back under the Biden administration because he tried to cram down and did cram down another one of these giant spending bills, despite the fact that we are already through the end of the pandemic. So yeah, you got some of those jobs back, or a huge portion of those jobs back after the end of the pandemic, but that was due to the fact that those jobs were always going to come back. And in fact, when you look at new jobs that weren't lost and came back during the pandemic, what you see is an absolutely terrible record. And I know people will cite these monthly jobs reports as proof positive that everything is all good under the Biden administration, even though everyday people understand that it isn't. But the fact of the matter is, there is a reason why months later they're revising them down. And one of the most recent revisions actually removed over 800,000 jobs that they previously reported were created under the Biden administration, because these revisions often come out months later. And yes, his economic policies have been a disaster. And yes, Kamala Harris has played her role in that the Senate was virtually tied, or was tied when she came into office, and she was the tie-breaking vote on key pieces of legislation that ended up making things worse.
I offer a new generation of leadership for our country that is about, in particular, turning the page on an era that sadly has shown us attempts by some to incite fear, to create division in our country, and to do the work that is about bringing some level of optimism and, dare I say, ambition about what I know is possible in our country. And so my plan for the economy includes what I imagine and believe and call an opportunity economy. What we can do to grow an opportunity economy where all people have access to the resources to compete, to apply their incredible work ethic, their ambition, their aspirations, and their dreams, and actually not just get by, but get ahead.
Now, Kamala Harris also ends up talking the nonsense about the opportunity economy, And let me explain this to you guys out there in the audience. Opportunity is a word that polls well. Economy is a number one issue, so she just put the word opportunity in front of the word economy and is hoping that you guys out there in the audience, the American people, the American voting base, say, hey, wow, that sounds pretty good, better sign up for that, even though there is no discernible difference between what she is offering and what Joe Biden is offering. And in fact, the only places where she is different, where she actually identifies policies, happen to be significantly worse. Take, for instance, her housing argument. Americans need houses. She talks accurately about how there's a supply shortage of housing, but her solution is only going to make the problem worse.
We have a shortage of housing supply. It's too expensive. People can't afford to buy a home. You know, we grew up, our parents, where they had the ability to somehow believe the American dream was attainable. Not so much for younger working people. And I recognize that. So my approach is a new approach, which is to say, let's just take this and deal with it head on. And part of my approach is to say, I'm going to employ and engage the private sector, in particular home builders with tax credits, to give them the incentive to create new housing, 3 million by the end of my first term.
Listen, I said this before and I will say it again. Kamala Harris is a California Democrat. Kamala Harris is a San Francisco Democrat. These people have no track record ever in the history of ever of reducing the price of housing. And just think about the stupid thing that is coming out of her face before you decide to sign up for this. She says, hey, we're going to build 3 million houses. How are we going to do that? We're going to partner with the private sector in order to build these houses. This is the exact same thing that they do in California over and over and over again. And as I've shown you over and over again on this channel, housing permits end up going down despite all of these crazy government programs, because the fact of the matter is, when the price of housing is up, builders don't need an incentive to build. But when you have an overregulated housing market that is disincentivizing building, you end up in situations like we see in the state of California, where you have prices skyrocketing, but building permits actually going down in comparison, which makes no sense. Now, I'm a fan of comparing this to the state of Tennessee, specifically in and around the Nashville area, which has seen a lot of people move into that area. And as you can see, in a market that is lightly regulated, that is likely altered by the hands of government, building permits seem to track with the demand of housing. That doesn't happen in huge portions of this country, and part of the reason why is all these different various regulations. And guess what? Kamala Harris is going to add more regulations, not take them away. So she's promising 3 million homes, but in reality, she's not going to build those 3 million homes. On top of that, she has let so many people into this country illegally globally that they're juicing up the demand for housing, and that is a major problem that the American people have to deal with. That is raising rents in all these different various places. So I don't trust this woman at all whatsoever to do anything except for stimulate demand. And her number one policy, the one thing that she might actually get passed, is this stupid $25,000 tax credit or down payment assistance credit.
And understanding that not everybody is, handed a silver spoon, but works hard and is trying to save up for a down payment. Part of my plan under my opportunity economy is to give first-time home buyers a $25,000 down payment assistance so they can just get their foot in the door to be able to then engage in what will prove to be their opportunity to build intergenerational wealth. And here's my personal experience coming at that. I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother was hardworking. She raised me and my sister Maya. She saved up, and it was only by the time I was a teenager that she could afford to actually buy her first home. And I know, and I identify with, I know where I come from.
Madam Vice President.
And I know, but I'm just going to finish. I know that so many people work so hard and should have the opportunity to just get their foot in the door. Again, so it's not just about getting by, but getting ahead.
And this is how you know 100% that Kamala Harris is not serious when it comes to housing policy. The idea that you would juice demand when we have a supply shortage is insane in every possible way. Now, I know a bunch of people have been saying this is likely to raise the price of housing by $25,000, but the fact of the matter is, it's actually likely to raise the price of housing by a minimum of $25,000, but actually a lot more, because this will push more people into the buyer's market who would normally be renting. So this could have devastating effects on the price of housing. And this is likely the one thing, if she got a Democratic Congress and a Democratic Senate, that she would be able to get passed, because make no mistake about it, she is not building those 3 million homes. It is not happening under her administration. We have seen this time and time again in California. She is essentially taking a California housing policy and trying to make it nationwide. And guess what? The houses never get built, but the down payment assistance for damn sure drives up the price of housing, because this is how these policies always work.
Madam Vice President, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the war in Gaza. Mm-hmm. You've called for a ceasefire hostage deal and a two-state solution as an end to the war for many months now. And while you've expressed support for Israel to defend itself, a two-state solution and a ceasefire are at odds with what Benjamin Netanyahu has said is their right to defense. If it matters, as you say, how Israel defends itself, where do you see the line between aggression and defense and our power as Israel's ally to do something?
Okay, a lot to unpack in what you just said. So let's start with this.
So right here, I got to give credit to this specific reporter for asking this question. And the reason why is because this is one of the questions that Kamala Harris definitely does not want to answer. In fact, I actually gave her credit for the answer that she gave in her CNN interview in response to the Israel-Gaza situation. And the reason why I gave her credit for that is because she avoided taking any kind of discernible position on that specific issue, which is exactly what she needs to do politically in order to thread the needle, in order to not piss off Muslims in Michigan, while at the same time not pissing off the Jewish donor base and all these different people that are supportive of Israel. So Kamala Harris is not ready not only for this question, but for the follow-ups.
I absolutely believe that this war has to end, and it has to end as soon as possible. And the way that will be achieved is by getting a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And we are working around the clock to achieve that end. Stepping back, October 7, 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered, and actually and some Americans, by the way, in that number, slaughtered. Young people who are attending a concert.
So right there, you can see just by the start of this answer, the razor's edge that Kamala Harris has to walk on in order to not lose Michigan, but at the same time, not alienate people who are concerned and attached and supportive of the nation of Israel. So she says, listen, the war has to end. That is my number one goal, to end the war immediately. We need to sign the deal and all that. And of course, October 7th, really bad. It's a very bad thing. However, However, when the reporter asks you specifically if you're going to take away weapons, take away funding from Israel, you can tell that this answer is not going to be good enough. You're dealing with one of these progressives who is of the belief that the attack on the Israelis, the attack on civilians, is justified because Israel, colonialism, evil European supremacy, and innocent angel Muslims can never do anything wrong.
And yes, so I have said Israel has a right to defend itself. We would.
But Madam Vice President, I think my ask is the difference between aggression and defense.
No, but it's important to put it in context, which is what I'm doing, and I'll get to that.
So right there, you can see the reporter is not having any of this, interrupting Kamala Harris because she says, I want to know the difference between aggression and defense, because of course, this is the portion of the Democratic base, which is a large portion of the base, that believes that Israel doesn't really have a right to defend itself, and everything that it does is an act of aggression because, of course, colonialism and blah, 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 not to mention the fact that these are the Blame America types, and because they view Israel as an outpost of the West, as a representative of the United States of America, they hate it by proxy.
And so how it does so matters. And far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Women and children. We have seen with horror the images coming out of Gaza. And we have to take that seriously. And we have to agree that not only must we end this war, but we have to have a goal of a two-state solution, because there must be stability and peace in that region, inasmuch as what we do in our goal is to ensure that Israelis have security and Palestinians in equal measure have security, have self-determination and dignity.
So look, up until this point, we have been grading Kamala Harris's answers in terms of how voters, specifically Muslims in Michigan and progressive Democrats, are going to feel about those answers. But I do want to point out an obvious glaring hypocrisy right here. What Kamala Harris is talking about when she's saying the war needs to end immediately, we need a ceasefire deal, and we need a two-state solution, is rewarding the enemy of our ally for a terrorist attack that they committed against our ally. The fact of the matter is, the people in Gaza, their governing force, which is called Hamas, started this war. Now they are losing the war, yet because they can't fight back, they've decided that they're going to go after the international community and try to get them to put pressure on their opponent so that they will surrender in this war. And by the way, make no mistake about it, ceasefire is a surrender from the Israelis, because guess what? They've had a bunch of different ceasefires throughout their history, and if ceasefires led to peace in this particular region, it would be the most peaceful area in the Middle East. The fact of the matter is, as I pointed out, and I will link this essay again, every time you put pressure on Israel to not wipe out Hamas, their enemies that initiate attacks against them, and lessen the consequences for them, you incentivize the future attacks. And since this one was so large in scale, if this doesn't justify removing Hamas from power, then nothing will. And let's be clear about this. The issue that these progressives have has nothing to do with Israel doing enough or too little to protect civilian casualties. The issue that they have is that Israel is doing anything because they believe the Muslims to be oppressed, and Israel, as an outpost of the West, as a representative of the United States of America, they consider to be the oppressor. Just look at the coverage from all these different people on the pager attack that happened in Lebanon that was specifically targeted to Hezbollah members. It's one of the most targeted attacks on a terrorist organization that you can possibly have, because these people decided to switch from smartphones to pagers and to walkie-talkies, and those were what was detonated. And look at how much they are against that as well. The reason why they're against that is because they don't want Israel doing anything. And by the way, the attack on Hezbollah is not unprovoked either. 60,000 Israelis in the north are displaced due to Hezbollah bombs, and the reason why they're initiating the bombing is because Israel is striking back against Hamas in Gaza. So you have an attack from the north in aid of a terrorist organization from their south. Israel responds in a very precise, concise way, targeting these people specifically, and guess what? The progressive left is still against it. Because why? Muslim innocent Israel, because outpost of West, is evil.
Question for you on that, though. What levers does the U.S. have to support Palestinians in their right to self-determination? And is it even possible as Israel's ally?
Well, absolutely. I will tell you, I have been actively involved in, for example, meeting not only with Israeli officials, but with Arab officials.
So again, look at where the questions are going. They're asking if there's any leverage, if there's anything you can use in order to force your allies to the table in order to get this two-state solution. And Kamala Harris is trying to weave and bob around it, but credit to these journalists for asking these questions. And by the way, shame on Kamala Harris and shame on all politicians for not being able to answer this question, because it is beyond the nation of Israel. I know a lot of people out there are Israel first types. They hate that country more than anything. So that's their number one issue. But the fact of the matter is, if the United States government abandons an ally in the middle of a war due to negative public perception of that war, then nobody else in the future is going to be able to trust the United States if they make them promises or guarantees, or if they have alliances with them. So again, this is beyond the nation of Israel. It's beyond this specific conflict. It happens to be that the Israelis should depose Hamas, obviously, for their own personal interests. But the reason why America can't just pull out right now is because that will give a message to the rest of the world that all they need to do is run a propaganda campaign against any one of our allies and we'll abandon them immediately.
But absolutely, the United States of America absolutely has a role, which is why we have been active, in particular with the Qataris and the Egyptians, around attempting to get a deal done and get it done as quickly as possible.
But Madam Vice President, just to follow up really quickly, is there a specific policy change that you, as President of the United States, would say you would do that would help this along? Because you've gotten a lot of credit for emphasizing the humanity of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. But what I often hear from folks is that there's no policy change that either you or President Biden have gone and said they would do. Is there a specific policy change as president that you would do in our helping of Israel?
We need to get this deal done. And we need to get it done immediately. And that is my position, and that is my policy. We need to get this deal done.
But in the way that we send weapons, in the way that we interact as their ally, are there specific policy changes?
Well, Eugene, for example, one of the things that we have done that I am entirely supportive of is the pause that we put on the 2,000-pound bombs. And so there is some leverage that we have had and used.
So this guy right here follows up. And again, this is an inordinate amount of questions coming from a Black Journalists Association. But obviously these people come from a more progressive bent. And Kamala Harris says, oh, we did a pause on 2,000-pound bombs. And that's the thing that we did to send a message. And this guy is not having it.
But what do you say to those that say that's not enough, that stopping the 2,000-pound bombs the one time wasn't enough, that this administration, your possible administration, has to do more?
Well, we are doing the work of putting the pressure on all parties involved to get the deal done. But let me be very clear also. I support Israel's ability to defend itself. And I support the need for Palestinians to have dignity, self-determination, and security.
That is such a sharp and concise follow-up question. He says, other than the pause, the one-time pause that the administration initiated, what else are you going to do? Again, these guys are like a dog with a bone. They do not like the nation of Israel. They're arguing for the progressive cause. And even though this is an absolutely crucial issue for Kamala Harris in winning Michigan, they don't have any fear to press her on this. And again, I gotta give credit where credit is due, because the Democratic Party has an incoherent position on this issue, and it's good to poke and prod and hopefully create division within their coalition if you want the evil orange man to win.
I want to switch gears to racial justice, Madam Vice President. Mm-hmm. Last month, you eulogized Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Yeah. Jackson Lee's signature bill, one of a few, was H.R. 40, which would create a commission to study the history of U.S. slavery and study the issue of reparations. She introduced H.R. 40 every session of Congress, taking up the mantle from Congressman John Conyers. This is a bill that you have co-sponsored as a U.S. Senator. Yet, this has, despite the fact that this has been, similar commissions have been created on the state level and on the local level, is yet to pass in Congress, let alone come out of committee. Congresswoman Jackson Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and other advocates have called for President Biden to take executive action to create this commission. Would you, as president, take executive action to create this commission, or do you believe that it should happen in Congress?
So right after the Gaza-Stani-Israel issue, we end up getting a question about reparations. And I have to say, I love the fact that this question was asked because there is almost nothing that is less popular to the general American population than the idea that you are going to rob white people of today to pay black people of today in order to redress the grievances of slavery. It's also important for me to point out that Kamala Harris descends from a slave owner on her Jamaican side of her family. Let's be clear about that. And it's also hilarious that Kamala Harris, in her answer, refuses to say the word reparations, despite the fact that when she was running for president before, she co-sponsored this dumbass reparations bill.
On the issue of what we need to do going forward, look, first of all, we just need to speak truth about history, in spite of the fact that some people would try and erase history and try and teach our children otherwise. We need to speak truth about the generational impact of our history, in terms of the generational impact of slavery, the generational impact of redlining, of Jim Crow law. I could go on and on and on. These are facts that have had impact. And we need to speak truth about it. And we need to speak truth about it in a way that is about deriving solutions. And frankly, I think that we, and part of that is studying it to figure out exactly what we need to do. But part of what we can do right now is, for example, what I'm talking about in terms of building an opportunity economy.
So after giving this roundabout dodge where she refuses to even repeat the word reparations because you already have the Trump campaign team ready to clip it and insert it into an ad, Kamala Harris goes through this whole thing and she's like, maybe we should study it. And honestly, please commit to studying it, because they've done that in San Francisco. They've done that in many places across the country. And spoiler alert, when you load up a reparations study committee with a bunch of black activists, what you end up getting is these people in a very self-serving way saying that they're entitled to millions upon millions of dollars. And in San Francisco, I believe it was 5 million, which, by the way, a lot of the black residents were outraged, or the other activists were outraged that it wasn't $7 million. And it also was supposed to guarantee around $100,000 in annual income after the one-time payment of $5 million. And it had all sorts of ridiculous things in there, like the fact that black residents should be entitled to $1 homes in the city of San Francisco. So please, for the love of God, do more reparation studies to show how entitled, how insane these black activists are for wanting all of these different special perks and privileges based on the fact of things that they never suffered through for themselves.
Which is addressing explicitly the obstacles that historically and currently exist and dealing with them. Student loan debt, medical debt, bias in home appraisals. What we need to do in terms of dealing with an issue that I have championed for years, black maternal mortality, which is the fact that black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth than other women. And we know that the reasons for that include disparities that pre-exist her pregnancy.
So Kamala ends up talking about all these different disparities, disparate outcomes, and all of that, and uses that as proof of the legacy of slavery, when in reality it is proof of the legacy of poor choices that these individuals make in their own lives. Black women are more likely to die giving birth because guess what? They're more likely to be overweight, more likely to be diabetic, more likely to miss prenatal care appointments, where, by the way, you can find complications in the pregnancy. And when you don't do all of those things leading up to the moment where you give birth, guess what? You show up to the hospital and there's not very much the doctors can do. On top of that, I will point out that studies show time and time again that Filipino women and Hispanic women actually have the lowest rate of maternal mortality in the United States of America. So it could also be down to other factors that we don't know about, because a lot of these Hispanic women are poor. They're actually poorer on average than black women in many cases, and they still don't have the same negative outcomes.
Do you have a position on whether that should happen, this commission should happen through executive order or via Congress?
I think Congress ultimately will have the ability to do this work. I'm not discounting the importance of any executive action, but ultimately Congress. Because if you're going to talk about it in any substantial way, there will be hearings, there will be a level of public education and dialogue that and I think that was part of the spirit behind the congressional action thus far, to ensure that everyone can participate in this conversation in a way that elevates knowledge about history and the reference points that that are the impetus of this conversation. Especially, again, when people are trying to deny history, when people are, so-called leaders are saying that enslaved people benefited from slavery. I mean, let's talk about the delta here in terms of the work that needs to be done.
So we've already seen throughout the course of Kamala Harris's campaign, her hit on Democratic hoax after Democratic hoax after Democratic hoax. And this is no exception. So right now she's making the case that Ron DeSantis changed the history program in the state of Florida to say that black people benefited from slavery, when in reality, the line that she's referencing has to do with black people who learned skills while they were enslaved that then ended up using those skills to start businesses after they were freed. It's actually meant to be a look, black people endured and became successful post-slavery because they have the grit and determination to be successful in the United States of America. This is actually meant to be an uplifting thing for black Americans to look at in their history, and it's also rooted in truth. And again, don't take it from me, take it from Dr. William Allen, pictured here. You'll notice that he's an old black guy, he's a professor, he was the former chairman of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and he wrote the damn curriculum. He says clearly he never once argued, and it doesn't say in the curriculum, that Africans benefited from slavery. That portion is to say that they proved resourceful and they had skills and aptitudes that they ended up using when they were freed. So yeah, Kamala, the liar, is taking a section meant to praise Africans for enduring slavery and uses it to say that, oh, they're actually saying that Africans were better off with slavery, which is not true. And by the way, Kamala Harris has praised similar courses when they're AP college courses taught in the left coast of the country, because, spoiler alert, this is an erroneous, false, and obviously race-baiting attack, because that's all the Democrats really have when it comes down to it, identity politics. So yes, black people learned skills during slavery. Some of them started businesses post-slavery and were able to be successful. Those people are inspirational people in the United States of America, and they should be taught in history. That's what the DeSantis curriculum actually did, and of course, Kamala Harris ended up supporting this when it was a college-level course being taught in high schools in the state of California. She specifically praised this, despite the fact that it had very similar language in it, because, of course, you're always trying to uplift the blacks over there, but anytime the Republicans try to do it, anytime they try to emphasize black people enduring, no, that's evil white racism, and they must be in favor of slavery. Disingenuous, fraudulent, disgusting attack, but what else do you expect from Kamala Harris, who has nothing except her claimed racial identities and her sex to run on?
You said that as president, you would want to codify Roe. If it came to your desk, you would sign a bill that did that. Roe protected access until fetal viability, which it also says is, quote, at about 7 months, but it may occur earlier, even at 24 weeks. So do you similarly support also codifying Roe's restrictions, which allowed states to ban abortion in the third trimester of pregnancy unless necessary to save the mother's life?
We need to put the protections of Roe v. Wade back into law. And when that bill gets passed by Congress, I will proudly sign it into law. Understand what is happening in our country.
Now, another question that I was actually very surprised to hear asked of Kamala Harris in this specific back and forth with the Black Journalists Association was about the upward limits of abortion and where she thinks the cutoff would be. And essentially, Kamala Harris refused to answer that question. So here's the crazy thing, and I understand I have a lot of pro-life people out there in my audience, but the facts are the facts. Abortion is a losing issue for the Republicans. The overwhelming majority of the American people believe in abortion up to some point. However, abortion a minute before the baby is born is a losing issue for the Democrats, because while most people are pro-choice, they are in and around the 12 to 24 weeks range for where they think that cutoff should be. But Kamala Harris has to appeal in her mind to this extreme base who thinks any limitation on abortion is the same as outright banning it, because they are more extreme than the pro-life side.
So that's where I stand. We need to put back in place the protection of Roe v. Wade and put that into law.
And those restrictions that are also in.
We need to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade and let an individual, in consultation with her doctor, make the decision based on what she can determine, because she's smart enough to know what's in her best interest instead of having her government tell her what to do, especially a bunch of people in these state capitals who think they're in a better position to tell her what to do than she is to know what's in her best interest.
Now, the reason I say that Kamala is actually appealing to people who are more extreme than the pro-life side is because the pro-life side, these people believe that abortion is murder. And if you believe that it's murder, it makes sense that you support an outright ban on murder. However, the abortion up until dilation crowd don't care at all that the baby can survive outside the womb. We hear all the time about viability and whatnot, and how it's a woman's body, it's a woman's choice, and all that. But if you can remove the baby from the woman's body and the baby can survive and the woman can survive, why would you kill it? It makes no sense at all whatsoever. But they don't care about that because, again, they're not about female bodily autonomy. They're about the right to kill your offspring.
So that's where I stand. We need to put back in place the protection of Roe v. Wade and put that into law.
And those restrictions that are also in.
We need to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade and let an individual, in consultation with her doctor, make the decision based on what she can determine, because she's smart enough to know.
Now, while you could say 20 to 25, maybe even 30% of the country is legitimately pro-life, who's in favor of this standard? Maybe 1 to 2% of the population, yet Kamala Harris refuses in any way, shape, or form to define the cutoff point or say where her, as somebody who's trying to do something about this federally, something that the evil orange man isn't trying to do, would put the cutoff point, because in reality, she's in favor of abortion up until dilation. Let's make no mistake about that. And again, if she wasn't, it would be so easy for her to say that she's with 90% of the population who thinks that that portion is too far. That stage of the pregnancy, you can't kill it at that point. Now, one of the things that I also want to take note of is this clip that is going viral, which is Kamala Harris basically jetting off the stage as fast as possible because she didn't like the fact that they pressed her on any of these issues throughout the course of the conversation, and she actually had to defend some of her positions and answer follow-up questions, which is something she hasn't done since she stole the nomination from Joe Biden. And now, of course, they also asked her what she's going to do about black men voting for her. She fumbled that answer as well.
Black men, as you know, are a closely watched voting bloc. You've hosted black men at your residence.
Yep.
You have engaged black men and censored them in your economic opportunity tour.
Mm-hmm.
But polling shows that some black men, particularly young black men, are considering voting for Donald Trump, and they see him as better for the economy. What is your message to young black male voters who feel left out of this economy, and how can your economic policies materially change their lives?
So I appreciate the spirit of the question, but I'll tell you, I've often been asked this question in a way that I've had to respond by first saying that I think it's very important to not operate from the assumption that black men are in anybody's pocket. Black men are like any other voting group. You got to earn their vote. So I'm working to earn the vote, not assuming I'm going to have it because I am black, but because the policies and the perspective that I have understands what we must do to recognize the needs of all communities. And I intend to be a president for all people.
But I'll leave the rest of the interview up to you guys to watch. Again, it will be linked in the description in full, but once again, we see Kamala Harris fall on her face on a multitude of issues, and this time the people who hit her hard was the National Association of Black Journalists, so give them credit where credit is due. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. You like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Kamala Harris falling flat on her face. Till next time.